This is Joseph Carpenter. Today is February 12th, 2025, and I am interviewing artist and university professor Benito Huerta. This interview is taking place on the campus of the University of Texas at Arlington, is sponsored by the UTA Department of History and Geography, and is part of UTA's Voices Unscripted collection. Thank you for agreeing to be interviewed today, sir.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Can you tell me a little bit about your early life, where you grew up, and talk a little bit about your parents?
I was born in Corpus Christi back in 1952. Grew up there. My father was actually born in Monterrey, Mexico. I think he was about a year old when his mother took him and the three older siblings from their home, and the details are kind of murky, but basically she left her husband. It was an arranged marriage, didn't work out, and so took the three kids. She had gotten an inheritance, crossed the border, and moved into a small town outside of Corpus called Robstown. And she opened up a restaurant there with the money she had. And my mother was born in Tynan, outside of Corpus. And her parents, her father was half German and part Spanish and part Mexican. So they grew up there. She had, I think it's 5 siblings. My father ended up having the 3 older siblings, and then I think 3 half-brothers, or step-brothers. And so, and one of his older sister, or not the oldest, actually is Olivia, had a cleaners. Her and her husband ran a cleaners on Highland Street in Corpus. And my mother's parents lived 3 or 4 houses down. So
Oh, wow.
she ended up working at the cleaners, and that's how she met my dad.
I see.
So,
Okay.
and then they got married in the Catholic Church. So at that time, the church said, if you're going to get married in the Catholic Church, you have to raise your kids in the Catholic school. So we went to Catholic school, and I got into trouble a few times, and so there was some disciplinary action that was taken as a result of my actions, which I didn't really care for. So I think it was about 7th grade. Other than that, it was a great neighborhood. Everybody all the kids liked being outside, playing, doing all kinds of things. Did some things that I shouldn't have been doing back then, but you can ask me about
How many siblings do you have?
8 siblings.
8?
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. So how are they divided up, brothers and sisters?
5 sisters and 3 brothers.
And where do you fall in the birth order?
I usually ask that question of other people, and I always find it interesting that they place me in the middle. I'm the oldest.
Really?
Yeah.
I would have placed you in the middle too.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So what were your first experiences with art, and how did you become connected with that?
I just remember that I always kind of drew as a kid. I know that a lot of kids always draw. I mean, we have, my wife has 3 kids, and then now we have 8 grandkids, and all the kids usually at some point like to draw and paint or something. And then at some point, they move beyond that. But I always enjoyed it. And when we moved from Corpus Christi, I was about 13, to Houston, we moved into where in Corpus, I think the neighborhood was very mixed. When we moved to Houston, basically white neighborhood. It turned out coincidentally that the 2 neighbors next to us were both Latino families. So but other than that, it was a very different thing. And so I actually ended up becoming more introverted when we moved to Houston. And I used, I think, drawing, and I was making models as a kid, and I liked making models. But those were like, inside my head kind of things, just kind of like by yourself.
Right.
And I started reading a lot at that time, and then my father. The reason we moved to Houston was he wanted to open up a fried chicken kind of restaurant, which is really, it was a departure as far as I was concerned, because when we were in Corpus, he actually owned 7 barbershops.
Oh, wow.
And he also promoted boxing matches, and he was training and managed boxers. And one of his friends was managing a boxer by the name of Lefty Barrera out of Robstown. And Lefty actually went to the 1960 Olympics in Rome and fought alongside, at that time, Cassius Clay. So,
Wow.
and he writes about it in his own autobiography. And
How did your father get into that? Because offline we were talking about your father having served in the
in Korea,
Army during the
yeah.
Korean War, and in Korea. How did he go from that service in the Army into being an entrepreneur, really?
Well, he went to barber school in San Antonio. And then it turns out, he told me the story that when he was on the ship going to Korea and back, he would cut hair and made money. Which is
Really?
I was like,
Okay.
he's making money and he might not be coming back. And
Right.
it's like, I'm thinking.
Wow.
And when I think the barbershop thing was a way to make money. The boxing thing is his passion, like art is my passion.
I see.
So he loved boxing. As a matter of fact, when he had never been to New York, and one of my brothers, who's 9 years younger than me, Carlos, planned a trip to go to New York. I think it was, I want to say in the early 90s. Took him to New York, and the reason he really wanted to go to New York was to go to Yankee Stadium. And the reason we wanted to go to Yankee Stadium was because Joe Louis fought there against Max Schmeling.
Right. Yes.
And won. And so he wanted to experience that place.
I see.
And then it turns out that my brother was telling me that they were walking by this gym, this boxing gym. I mean, they didn't know about it. They were just kind of happened to be. And there was these 2 guys who were kind of doing shadow boxing outside the gym. And my father, being the kind of like the boxer person he says, you're doing it wrong. You need to do it this way. And then he showed him, and then he says, oh, why don't you come in and, talk to the guys, show some moves and stuff. And he said, no, we're going on to, I don't know, they were going to go to eat or something. But my brother also took him to, there's a bar there. I think it's one that, I don't know if it was one that Jack Dempsey used to have, and I don't know if it's still going, but they went to a bar that had all this memorabilia of boxing in it, and they hung out there for a while. So
How did his multiple interests and his entrepreneurship impact you at a young age?
well, I think that I would go with him to the boxing matches in Corpus. And one of his boxers was, I don't remember his first name, but he went by Blackie Zamora. And he ended up being like number 6 in the welterweight division in the state of Texas. And so my father, I don't know the reason why, but at that time he needed somebody else to be the kind of the promoter. So they had to file, and he got one of my mother's sisters, oldest sister, Alice, and to be can get a license to become the official promoter. And at that time, it's like the first woman to be a boxing promoter in
Wow.
Texas.
Wow. That's interesting.
Probably anywhere, because
Yeah.
it was not like something that was heard of.
Right.
And he did it more for, it was kind of legality as far as having somebody else do it. And she was willing to do it, and she was kind of proud of it ever since. And she got a little involved in it. But what was interesting to me was as I learned how he not only managed and trained boxers, but the organization of the boxing matches themselves. He would sell tickets, get the venue, and so on, and arrange for other fighters to fight, like a main event, and then there were other boxing events leading up to that. So it's all of that. I just kind of was as a kid soaking up all this information.
Yes.
It really kind of came in handy when going back to my time of being an introvert in Houston, I listened to music, and it was like when we moved to Houston, it was 65, I was listening to the radio back in Corpus, and at that time in Corpus, the Beatles had just come out, so I heard that, everything, all the British Invasion bands. But then before that, you had the Beach Boys and all the surfing music, and then Motown. So that was kind of like what I heard. And then in '65, the music was beginning to change. So rock and roll becoming a bigger thing, psychedelia, all that kind of stuff. So I was listening to music. 1968, I was about 15, 16. I went to go see my first concerts, Jimi Hendrix.
Oh, wow.
With Chicago Transit Authority, became the band Transit Chicago, and
Yes.
then Soft Machine. Interestingly enough, Soft Machine, the name of the band was taken from a William Burroughs book. I'll spare you what the name was used for. But
That's quite a first concert.
that was quite a first concert. I got to see Hendrix second time in the following year. Was going to go the third time, and then I wanted to go see the Who. I'd never seen the Who, so I saw them in 1970. But I started seeing concerts on a regular basis, and to go to concerts, I would basically pay my own way. My parents didn't give me money. I had to walk almost a mile to the bus station, take about a 40-minute ride on the bus to downtown, walk about 4 blocks to either the music hall or the Coliseum. So that was and then going back home, that same route, after, around midnight or so.
And you do this by yourself?
I was doing them by myself. And I was also walking home because Bel Air High School, which was further down than the bus stop. So I was walking to Bel Air and coming back. And then for junior high, when I was going to Jane Long, I would go to the bus stop, take the bus, and then they would drop me off. They would drop a lot of students off right across the street from Jane Long. So, it wasn't until I think it was about 17 when I had already learned how to drive. My father got me to drive when I was about 15, when I wasn't supposed to. And then I finally got one of the license where I had to have an adult.
Yes.
So, but my father, wanted me to drive and then at some point he closed the restaurant down and opened up a bigger restaurant in Rosenberg. And that's when I was going back and forth. And so basically my weekends were working, and sometimes in the evenings.
What were you doing?
Everything. I was in the beginning, just helping around the restaurant. It was a small restaurant. It wasn't big. It was, and then when he moved to the bigger restaurant, I was washing dishes, waiting on tables, cashier, cook, delivery. Going out and getting stuff for the restaurant, everything. And then toward the end, when I was about 7, I think I was already 17. On Saturdays, my dad would open up around 8 o'clock and then close at 2 o'clock in the morning. And at that point, about 10 o'clock, he would leave to go home, which is 30 minutes away in Bel Air. Bel Air was a city within Houston, in southwest Houston, right near where the Galleria, you're familiar with Houston there. So we would drive, so he would drive back, and then I would work and close the restaurant at 2 o'clock, go deposit all the cash that we made into a night deposit at the bank. I got stopped a few times by the police because they're like, "What are you doing here?" You know, 3 o'clock in the morning.
Right. With a bag of money.
With a bag of money, not taking it out, dropping it off.
Right.
So, so all those things, kind of like when I started University of Houston, they had a entertainment committee, part of the program council, and they booked the concerts for the university.
I see. Okay.
So I thought instead of, and the year before they had sponsored Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young in '69, and so the person who had booked them was still the chair of the entertainment committee. So we became friends, and I became part of the committee, and I ended up just working as a stagehand. And so one of the first concerts I was working on as a stagehand was Paul Marriott, and he had a hit at that time. It was like kind of like a one hit. I can't remember. I think I might have the album because I'll get free albums sometimes. Right. And then James Taylor and Carole King and Joe Mama was the second concert I worked, and that was like one of the nicest thing was when they did a rehearsal in the afternoon. They basically did like almost an hour concert. And we were just like the stage crew, and their crew were the only ones in this was at Hoffein's Pavilion, which was newly built for the basketball team. And so there was another alternative to the Coliseum in downtown Houston, which is where I used to go. So they started having concerts there. And so the second year, in '72, I became the chair of the entertainment committee.
Okay.
And I wanted to book certain people, so I ended up booking Randy Newman, George Carlin, John Prine, Loggins and Messina, Stevie Wonder.
Wow.
It seems there's somebody else there. And then we co-produced concerts with other promoters outside the university, professional promoters. So as a result of that, we were going to work with another promoter on the Allman Brothers and the Grateful Dead, and then one of the bass player for the Allman Brothers, Barry Oakley, had a motorcycle accident and died, and so that was 2 weeks before the concert, and they bailed out, and so the Grateful Dead were the only ones, and the guy from Warner, in this case, it's another perk. The guy from Warner Brothers said, "Oh, you want to meet Jerry Garcia?" I said, "Sure." So I got to meet him, talk to him backstage before they went
that's
on.
interesting. Yeah.
George Carlin, talked to him, and at that time, we were really lucky because when I booked him, his fee was $1,250. 1 month later, because all of a sudden his career just took off. And 1 month later, his contract we didn't have to pay it. Our contract was honored.
Yes.
But we came in after his price went up, which was $12,500.
Wow.
So
that's a
and
huge
we
jump.
sold out, and we were just selling tickets to our students for $1 and to the public for $3, so we sold out. As an entertainment chair, I was supposed to go on stage and introduce the acts. I couldn't do it because I was still an introvert.
Right. Right.
And I was like, I'm not going to get in front of those people.
Right.
Like,
Well, how did you end up at University of Houston?
I just applied because I was living in the area. I'm in the city, and that was like the place to go. And I got in. My grades were not very good at that time because I never really liked school, and I was interested in drawing because I was always drawing, and that was the other thing that got me involved with the entertainment committee was that I liked the concert posters from the '60s and the album covers, so I saw myself as wanting to do that.
Okay.
So when I got into program council, Cheryl Nelson, who was the chair of the entertainment committee, asked me about, she knew I liked to draw, and she asked me if I would do the concert posters. So I started doing concert posters. They were not very good in the beginning, but they got better
Uh-huh.
as I went along. And then I started taking, I did not go into the fine arts. I had to take some fine art classes, but I was wanting to go into basically what they call design now. It
Mm-hmm.
was, at that time, it was commercial art before it got changed to graphic art.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I was interested in learning, but I wasn't as interested in it as much as I thought.
Mm-hmm.
But the concert posters were something I was constantly did throughout the 5 years I was there at the University of Houston. So I got into school, and I was the first in my family to go to a university. My mother graduated from high school. My father never graduated from high school because of World War II,
Mm-hmm.
where he was drafted into into I don't know what branch, but I assume it was just the Army.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but he ended up doing clerical work because it was toward the end of the World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And then later he did end up enlisting in the Army to get away from family issues.
Mm.
And then 6 months before his enlistment was up, he was the Korean War started, and because he was already trained,
Mm-hmm.
they just shipped him out. So he was wounded twice and got 2 Purple Hearts.
Wow.
And then the second time was shipped back, and he was stationed out of Washington State. And then one of the things that is still, I think about and how it affects me, because I think these things still happening,
Mm-hmm.
is on the way back with several people going back to Corpus Christi, because we were still living in Corpus, and this was probably before my time even. So it was he and his buddies, who are all Latino, were coming back to Corpus. They were wearing their uniforms, and they were not served because they're Mexican.
Mm.
And so my understanding, they kind of riled up the place before they left
Wow.
immediately.
Yes.
So, and then we had, there's been, my father told me issues about racism,
Mm-hmm.
after that, when he was when I was a baby, my mother was, even though she was Latina, she was very white skinned.
Mm-hmm.
She went in to see about getting an apartment, and they were going to give their apartment either the landlady or the apartment manager came out and saw my father with me. He was holding me as a baby, and because his skin is about as dark as mine,
Mm-hmm.
and said, "Nope, we don't allow Mexicans in
Mm.
here." So that was another thing. And then the
Right.
other problem that he had when he he started opening barbershops in Corpus, and then he was expanding and opening. Before we left Corpus, he had 7 barbershops, but one of them was moving into an area that was mostly a white neighborhood. It was also, he was non-union,
Mm-hmm.
and there were a lot of the other barbershops that were not Latino were union.
I see.
And so those barbers, he had gotten a place, was about to open, and there was a confrontation,
Mm.
a physical confrontation, where several barbers from the other side were coming over, and they were going to, probably just, trash his place.
Wow.
But because he was training boxers, he brought his boxer friends, and my
Oh.
grandfather, my mother's father, came with him, and he's a tall guy, and all these guys, I mean, those boxers are in really good shape, and the barbers saw what they were up against, and they just said, "We give up." So
Never mind.
yeah,
Right.
so and I
Wow.
ended up my first job was shining shoes at his barbershop.
I see.
So
Okay. So, how did all of this in your childhood, do you think that it had an impact on your art or influenced your art in some way?
well, yes, I think that being kind of like socially, politically conscious as a result, and
Mm-hmm.
still conscientious, because even what's happening nowadays, and in the last several years, it makes me think that you saw these things happening earlier on. You saw the civil rights movement, seeing like Robert F. Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, and then Martin Luther King get assassinated, and then I'm becoming very familiar with some of the African American leaders like Eldridge Cleaver, Malcolm X. I read out Malcolm X autobiography at that time, back in the 60s. I read Eldridge Cleaver's Soul on Ice. Several of these books, so I was becoming very, knowledgeable about, some of the struggles and stuff. So I felt that as I got into art, I think that, well, my last year at the University of Houston, I ended up had a lot of electives left over, and I'd gotten everything. And this was to get a degree basically in Bachelor of Fine Arts, but it was basically in design. And then all of a sudden I took painting for the first time, watercolor, advanced drawing, lithography, and short story writing. And for the first time, I felt like I was having fun in school.
Right.
It was fun to learn, and
Right.
all of a sudden, I started my grades went up. Was having a great time. I still was working as a stagehand, make some money, and doing concert posters and make money that way. I didn't have a regular job. I did maybe they had a university center print shop, but they had like a letterpress, and it was just a part-time job. But overall, it was those two things: working as a stagehand and concert posters that paid my way through school.
Wow.
So the last concert poster I did was for Linda Ronstadt. I heard she liked the poster, and I got part of the painting was got free tickets. I remember one time, 74, Mike Pilot, who I've met because he was the representative for Columbia Records, said they needed a postcard for Bruce Springsteen concert at the Armadillo World Headquarters in Austin. And he was playing in Texas for the first time in Houston at Liberty Hall, and he had given me his Springsteen's first album, but it was a press copy, and Jimmy Spears' album, and who's ended up turning out to be the opening act for Bruce Springsteen at Liberty Hall, which is 500-seat hall. And at that time, nobody knew of him. I just knew of his music.
Right.
And but I did a postcard for the following weekend in Austin for the Armadillo World Headquarters. But seeing that Springsteen concert was amazing. I went. They did a radio broadcast on Thursday night, which I heard as I
Right.
was drawing, and then Friday night I went. Saturday night they had the last concert, and then Sunday he did a free concert, and I went to go see that. And so, but anyway, Mike Pilot says, well, what do you want, how much do you want for doing the postcard for the Springsteen thing at the Armadillo World Headquarters? And I said, how about $75, which is a lot of money at that time. He says, how about if I give you all of Bob Dylan's albums? It's all vinyl. I said, sure, I'll take all that. So it was like, the music was still,
Yes.
an important part.
Right.
And the last concert I worked as stagehand was the Bob Dylan Rolling Thunder Review benefit for Hurricane Carter. Who was a boxer, and it was at the Astrodome. And he had Ringo Starr, Carlos Santana, and Stephen Stills as guest artists of the Rolling Thunder Review. And then he had Sean Phillips and Stevie Wonder opening. And then I was in 5 stagehands who were supposed to be on this concert stage throughout the whole concert to help with equipment changes. And so got to meet Diane Cannon, the actress. She was there. famed concert promoter from San Francisco, Bill Graham, who did a lot of those concerts in San Francisco. I had actually met him a couple of times earlier when he worked in a couple of other concerts that he brought to Hofheinz Pavilion. One of them was the Elton John. And then, but in that concert, that was the last concert I worked on as a stagehand. And then I was going to go to graduate school, 76.
So talk about that. Talk about the transition from that, because you are obviously seeped in the art culture, if you will, during that time. You're mentioning all these names, and these people were huge.
Yeah.
I mean, top acts, and you were associated with all of this, and you were doing this artwork related to that music. How then did you transition to being an artist in your own right, so to speak?
Well, I think that there was a turning point in 1974, the year before that. I think it was that summer before it was to graduate, 1 year before I was to graduate in 1975. I went to apply for a job. Pennzoil was starting an in-house art department, and all I had for my portfolio was the concert posters. I could have shown them my design assignments, but didn't interest me as much. And so, based on the concert posters, they were ready to hire me because it was the illustration, the design, the overall design of the piece, hand lettering, for the most part. I picked out the paper and the inks. I talked to the press. They said, we don't know anybody who does all those different things. So they wanted to hire me on the spot. And at that time, they offered $15,000. And the reason I bring up $15,000 is it seems to be kind of a magical number for me. 15,000 was the budget that I was given for booking concerts for the University of Houston. One of my colleagues who's still here, who started working here in 1978, that was his salary. His beginning salary was $15,000 in 1978. My budget for the gallery when I started here was $15,000.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, I said, I'm the first one in my family to go, and I want to graduate. I have one more year. And they said, we'll hold you a spot. We really would like for you to come. And I took all those classes I just mentioned and never looked back.
Wow.
You know, it was just like, I took another year of post-baccalaureate classes to find out if this was like a fluke or if it's something something I wanted to do. And one of my professors who had just started teaching there, Gail Stack, who's now kind of well known in that area, encouraged me to go to graduate school.
I see.
But during that time, I was making all this work, and then I started saying, well, what do you do with this work? And so, I mean, how do you get it out to get it seen?
Yes.
So I started organizing shows around campus, and because I had the connections with the program council, I knew all the people at the University Center, and they just opened up a new addition, which was underground, to the University Center. And they had all these empty walls, and I said, hey, do you mind if we come in one morning and set up art and then take it down that evening? You know, you don't have to do anything. We'll take care of it. And I had organized a lot of my fellow students to do this. They were interested. They said, yeah, you're fine, because they knew me pretty well, so
Sure.
they knew I was good for my word. So we took art in and hung it, and people were like, oh, what is this? Because all of a sudden there's art.
Right.
And then we took it down that night, and people was like, well, where's the art the next day? Because they were expecting.
Right.
So it was kind of a spontaneous art exhibition. Then I did another one where I had one student carry one of their own artworks, and we stopped in fairly congested areas of the university, stopped and just displayed our work, and people would ask us questions, and then we moved to another spot.
Hmm.
And so I called it the moving picture show.
Right. Okay.
The last show I did was a mock faculty show, and I got one student to take on one faculty member, and then added the theme of sex to it to spice it up. And then there was a room in what they call the art barn at the time, which is where all the studio classes were. And there was a big litho press there that one of my professors who was teaching lithography had, and but stored there. So, but that wasn't being used, and so they said you could use this room for a week. So we had the opening on April Fool's Night. So very appropriate, I thought. And I remember I ended up doing one professor's work and then collaborate with another student to do another professor's work. And then that professor ended up, he was being represented by a gallery. And he said, if you don't mind, if you're up for this, I'd like to take this, sign it, take it to my gallery, and if I sell it, you get half. And split it with you.
Wow.
And I said no, because it's not his painting. I mean, it's about his work, but it's not, he didn't do anything.
I see. Okay.
So,
Interesting. Yeah.
so somebody would be buying a fake.
Yeah, forgery, essentially, right?
Yeah. Well, it wasn't a forgery. We were kind of making fun because I added the theme of sex.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
He went to school in Beaumont, and so we had like two crayfish making out, like a little small scene there in the corner.
Right.
So it just, part of that kind of humor.
But it was intended to spoof.
Yeah, it's intended
The
to spoof. And a lot of the professors came to the opening.
Yeah.
They thought it was great.
And so you took influences from their work.
Yeah, you kind of wanted
And
to
then-
make it look like their work, but spoof it, And so it was kind of
That's
like
great.
tongue in cheek.
Yeah, that's great.
So that kind of set my path on the curatorial
Mm-hmm.
aspect, and I continued it. Continued in New Mexico State University in graduate school,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
and got into trouble pretty quickly. So the first year I was in Las Cruces, New Mexico, I realized that it was kind of the art department was a little sleepy for me, because I come in from Houston, and so it's like, maybe I should and I talked to some people and said, how about if we did a pornography show? And pornography is one of those words that's like,
Mm-hmm.
you
Right.
don't sit on the fence on that. You're either,
Right. And
Well-
what is the line? I don't know what it is, but I know it when I see it,
Yeah,
or something
yeah.
like that.
So the word got around, and people all of a sudden were excited to hey, yeah, let's do this show and blah blah blah. And then one of the people who was on my graduate committee, Richard Wickstrom, said, turns out that the assistant dean from the graduate department wants to talk to you.
Mm-hmm.
So I got called to talk with her, and then she said they heard about this show.
Mm-hmm.
There's no show yet. They just
Right.
heard about it because that word is being used.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I thought that, I used the word intentionally to galvanize people,
Mm-hmm.
to take
Kind of be
sides.
controversial. It gets attention.
Right. And so she said that part of the reason I went to New Mexico State, I had a teaching assistantship the first year. They normally don't give it the first year.
Oh, okay.
They give it the second year of your graduate studies. I got it the first year, and that was the reason, because you get in-state tuition. And then I actually taught. That was a shocker. I thought I was going to be an assisting a professor,
Uh-huh.
not teaching myself, and that's what I was doing.
Wow.
So she said that they had a teaching assistant in English, and this was the other thing that kind of got me thinking, was that was reading passages from a book that had dirty words in it. And so she lost her teaching assistantship, which I was surprised because that, is literature.
Right.
We're at a university, not in high school.
Right.
And so she said, so basically the veil threat was that I could lose my teaching assistantship.
I see.
And then it became another insinuation was that, and the art department's budget is not very big. And I'm thinking, are you telling me that I could affect, I didn't say this, I just
Sure.
thought it in my head, that I could affect the art department's budget if I do this show?
Right.
So I didn't know I had that much power.
Right.
So I talked to Richard, and we did the show, but we did it differently. So I decided that we would cover everything in black. So it became more conceptual.
I see.
And so, and then growing up Catholic, because by the time I was in college, I was moving away from religion completely, myself personally. But during Lent in the Catholic Church, they veil everything. You cover up all the statues. So, there's precedent
Right.
covering up art.
Right.
So we covered everything up, and then more controversy arose from that. The school paper and the city paper had kind of like cartoons saying, basically, is this censorship? Is censorship going on? Because the rumors are already out there about what the show's contents were.
Right.
The assistant dean was actually very supportive, and she said, I'd be happy to host an unveiling of the work at my house. And I said, okay, we'll do that. We took all the work after the show and delivered it to her house. She had a reception, she paid for it herself and everything. We unveiled everything, and then she looked at the work and said, this isn't pornographic at all. And I said, this is the problem when you have artists doing with the term pornography. The problem with it is that they bring aesthetics into it, and they deal with it aesthetically. And when you're dealing with aesthetics, pornography has no aesthetics, really.
Right.
It's pretty direct, and
Right.
and there's nothing, beautiful about it. So I said, so yeah, she was really surprised.
Right. But it was that word. That word
It was that
so
word.
charged.
So interesting, again,
Yeah.
how the word can be charged. It's like I was teaching professional practices, which is about the business of art here at UTA, class that I developed, and I talk about we talk about the NEA and the problems that they had, kind of the culture wars back in the late 80s, early 90s. And there was this artist, photographer, you're probably familiar, Andre Serrano, who did Piss Cries.
I remember.
And I said, nobody knows if the liquid in there is actually urine or not. The only reason that people got upset about it is the word piss.
Right.
And it's blasphemous for a lot of people to put those two words together. So the power of that word made that controversial. And if you didn't have that word, it might not get the attention, And the ironic thing was that he was a devout Catholic. It was his criticism of hypocrites in the Catholic Church.
Interesting. So the message was totally lost on
Yeah,
the public because
Yeah.
of what was
yeah.
being discussed there. Yeah. Interesting.
So
Go
one
ahead.
thing I would just say, that
go ahead.
transition. So by that point, as you can see, I've made a complete transition from, graphic arts design, concert posters, concerts, stage crew, to wanting to be an artist, and then being encouraged to go be an artist, going to graduate school, and I had another interesting conversation with my graduate chair, who was teaching from a book about materials and techniques, and deals with the mechanics of making art. and how to do good studio practices so that your work lasts forever. And some of the things where I was doing with my work were against some of that. Not that I was against it, but it's just that I like to experiment and do different kinds of things. And then he called me in, and a couple of times. One of the times he called me in because I was getting paint on the floor in the painting studio, paint on the walls, paint on the ceiling, paint on other people's paintings. And then and then I was like working in a manner that was kind of anti his class as far as the techniques and materials. And I said, I'm not trying to do this. It's not, intentional. It's just like I'm learning. I'm so new to making art that I'm trying to experiment and play with these ideas that I read about and hear about. Now that I'm learning, when I was in art history in undergraduate, I was sleeping. And then when I was in art history, now I was like, I'm learning. I really want to learn. And so he said, well, aren't you just here so you could teach, be a professor? And I said, no, I'm here so I can be an artist.
So you really had kind of transitioned from a graphic artist / curator into an artist in your own right at this time.
Well,
So,
but the curator was along with the artist, as like before, and this is where the tie-in with my father organizing boxing matches. I was organizing concerts. Working with a committee, working kind of organizational skills, then comes together with curatorial skills.
Right.
It's really the same thing, just different area. So those two things were, those two things happened together because I liked the organization of putting concerts together. I like putting shows together. So those two things kind of went hand in hand. And I didn't realize that what I was doing was being a curator. Nobody said, oh, you're being a curator. It wasn't until 1985 I was back in Houston, and I was asked to curate a show, and I would be paid $500. And it's like, what? You get paid for this? So it's like and I told the person, I said, well, maybe I should not be in the show. I should just curate, And they said, no, actually, we want you because you're also an artist. And that whole project became another kind of big collaborative work, which is, I'll spare you the details. And then not too long after that, I was asked to curate a Texas Hispanic contemporary art show for Midtown Art Center, a nonprofit in Houston. And they were going to pay me pretty good money, really good money. And I thought, well, at that point, I separated myself from the show because before it was my friends and myself.
Right.
And at that point, I said, if this is a professional thing, I'm not going to include myself. And so it was a way to avoid the conflict of interest.
Right. I was going to ask you that. So in graduate school at University or New Mexico State, you were participating with your own art and bringing in other artists, fellow students as well. Okay. And so then you started separating yourself from that. But where did you transition stylistically?
Stylistically, I think that what ended up happening, there's when I was in undergraduate school, that last 2 years that I was there, once my last year and then the post-baccalaureate, probably that first year was more like assignment oriented because I was doing that. And then, but some of those assignments I ended up doing, I think my work was already taking leaps because I was so eager. I had already the skill set. But and then but my last year, I started I remember that because I was an introvert, there was also a sense of despair that I had in my life at that time because I just felt alone. And so I know that there was an artist by the name of a British artist by the name of Francis Bacon, whose work I liked a lot. And I knew another fellow student of mine, what he was doing, things that were kind of inspired by that. And I thought, well, I started looking at photographs from newspapers and things where people are not happy and they're doing things that it's like somebody's jumping off a building out of the window. So I would paint things like that. I paint about pain, but I was using exterior references to do that with, because I couldn't pull it out of myself to do that myself.
Okay.
Like from me, it was a self-portrait, but without being a self-portrait. So it was like that was, and I didn't use much color. The colors were earth tone, muted colors, so they're kind of reflection of what was in the work. And then the last painting I did, and then the graduate school, there was a picture of a black kid who had been killed and he's out in the street, and there's these like legs all around him, and they just kind of focus. So I took that, and became an interesting thing for me, was that conceptually I started thinking of like, I drew the kid and then pretended to turn it where I turned that as if it was like you're looking straight on. And then how like at that time they would do a chalk line around the figure. Well, I did this kind of splatters on the painting, like there were blood and things, and kind of like really violent looking. And then I did a chalk line, like the police would do around that. And that was a big portion of the painting. And there was a top portion with the kid. And so that was my last painting, and it kind of encapsulated everything I kind of felt. So we go on to graduate school, and I thought, I remember I had a show that summer before I went to graduate school at the University Centers. They have like a little gallery called Gallery Center. I had my first one-person show there. And I remember hanging my work, and somebody came in and said, "Who did these macabre and depressing paintings?" And I thought to myself, because I wasn't depressed anymore, I think because of my work, I was able to work out all that stuff.
Right.
And I didn't relate to that. So when I went to graduate school, I was like, I want to do something lighthearted.
Huh. Okay.
And so I had read a book in high school in my senior year called Trout Fishing in America by Richard Brodigan. I had read a review in Time magazine, and so I picked it up. I loved the book, and I decided that I'm going to do work about trout fishing, nonsensical stuff.
Right.
And it turns out that the cutthroat trout in New Mexico is a state trout, so it just kind of worked out.
Huh.
So, a lot of my work, not that I completely gave up the other stuff, but it was just I really wanted to get away and move away and deal with other things. One of the major works that I did in graduate school was probably the painting portrait of my father, who was really stern growing up, and did not like me going to become an artist. He preferred that I would do that graphics job because it was a job.
Right.
And he and I did not have a good relationship for the last probably ever since we moved to Houston, probably that time. So I did a portrait based on a black and white photograph, did a large painting, and I remember that painting the face, the head, many times over and over until I got it. Always looked like him, but it didn't feel like him until the last one, and then the rest of it was easy to complete. And that to me was a major leap in my work.
So going back to the sense of sadness or melancholy, that's pretty common among artists, is it not?
No, not really. I mean, I would say there's in the 50s, there were a couple of major artists that, aside from the abstract expressionists, the abstract expressionists from the 40s, early 50s, were always about what they feel inside and expressing that. That's why they're abstract expressionists. They're expressing themselves in an abstract manner.
Okay.
But there are a couple of artists by the name of Robert Rauschenberg and Jasper Johns who still kind of worked in the look of the abstract expression, but they were starting to encompass everyday, ordinary kind of materials, or their subject matter was that. So, and remember there was an interview with Rauschenberg, and he was talking about, that whole idea that artists suffer is to me, it's really, but to me, I base it on the movies. And the movie that I would base it on particularly is A Lust for Life with Kirk Douglas as Vincent van Gogh.
Yes, I'm familiar with it.
By Vincent Van Minnelli, the director.
Yes.
And you know who he is. So in that movie, at that time, well, it's probably one of the first movies about an artist who cuts his ear,
Right.
who's really depressed, supposedly kills himself later on. So this sets the tone, and you have to remember at that time in the 40s, most of the United States, you didn't see paintings by artists. You saw them in New York, but even then, New York was a regional place that was becoming international because of World War II. A lot of the European artists emigrated from Europe to escape the war and came to New York. So all of a sudden, New York was beginning to grow, and those artists began to integrate into that society. And New York culture started. And in the end, New York replaced Paris as the center of the art world. But it was still growing. But the rest of the world, the rest of the United States, is a new, you remember, at that time, probably less than 100 years earlier, the West was settled.
Yes.
So art, culture, museums was not a thing. So for most people, that film changed your image, your mental image of what an artist is. So if you told somebody you're an artist in the 50s and you're in Texas, oh, better watch out for this guy because he's going to be...
Like Van Gogh.
Yeah.
Right.
He's going to hurt somebody, he might hurt himself.
Yeah. Interesting.
So, and some other movies have kind of still played on that. But there's been other films since then, probably more in the 60s and 70s, where the artist is actually well-adjusted, part of regular society, and they just happen to make
It doesn't
art.
make much of a plot.
Yeah, that's a problem. So,
well-adjusted artist.
Yeah, just another artist. Yeah, and there's the problem. There is another artist. There's so many artists now.
Right.
And I curated a show actually for the College Art Association. They had a conference in Dallas, and we got the actual official exhibition for the conference, the college CAA official exhibition, and you could apply for money. And the chair of the department at that time said, "We need to apply." And I said, "Okay." He said, well, and he had an idea. He said, "What's your?" I said, "What's your idea?" And I said, "Well, how about we show graduate students from the other universities?" And I said, "That doesn't sound that interesting." I'm telling this to the chair,
Right.
my boss. So he said, "Well, what's your idea?" And so when I just came up with the idea, I said, "Why don't we select 7 to 9, 10 artists who are well-known artists, go back to the graduate school they went to, have them select a current graduate student that would represent them in a show like this, and we would pair them. And the work would not have necessarily be the same kind of work. It would be different artists." So we ended up getting the grant based on that. So we got a grant for the exhibition was $10,000. For the catalog was $5,000. $15,000 again.
Wow. Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
So we had, they had buses coming to the campus from downtown Dallas where the conference was. and we had 2,500 people in the gallery and outside the gallery. That area outside in the hallway, the main hallway, we had tables out there with food and stuff, because the chair department spent extra money for the reception, because we never spent that much money, but we never knew we were going to get that many people there.
Wow, that's amazing.
And then people loved the show. Some came back on their own the next day, next couple of days.
So what artists had influence on your work? Or can you name anyone?
I'll break them down to two parts.
Okay.
The first part is artists that you see, artists that you learn about and see in exhibitions. And so probably Picasso, Marcel Duchamp, Jasper Johns, Rauschenberg, de Kooning, some of the surrealists. I think Salvador Dali early on was incredible. Magritte, still an incredible artist, Belgium artist. And some of what the Dadaists did, and as a result, because there were actually more like an anti-war movement at the time after World War I. During that time period, they were just talking about the absurdities of people dying for war in war. And I think early on, probably Velázquez. I would say when I actually saw Las Meninas at the Prado Museum in Madrid, I told myself, oh, this is what I'm really up against.
Well, what about those artists, though? What about them that inspired you? What was it?
The earlier ones probably and not to mention, not to think about it, but it's the craftsmanship, like Velázquez, the craftsmanship. Picasso, the early works, the craftsmanship, the painting, the style, and all that. But then you start then it became the ideas that are behind that. If you think of that, are you familiar with Las Meninas by Velázquez?
I'm not.
It's a painting. He was one of the court painters for King Philip at that time, and did a painting that's probably about 10 feet tall, I think, maybe 8 feet wide. And what it is a painting about the scene. It's almost like a mirror of the scene that's behind or in front of the canvas. But you're seeing the back of the painting in the painting.
Yes,
And
I know what you're talking
seeing
about.
him painting it.
Yes.
And then you see King Philip and his queen.
I didn't realize that's who that was, but I have
That's
seen that painting.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then there's Marguerite, the dogs, and all that. So conceptually, is that Velázquez is looking at you, looking at him, and then you have the king and queen in the very background, and they're in it. They're kind of like unofficial portrait of them, and so you're seeing this scene as if you walked into a room, and it's huge. So it's almost like you're looking like you walked into literally a room. So it's just conceptually, it was just like it went so much further than anything at that time, in my opinion. Nobody thought about like the picture plane being a window. I mean, it's talked about in art history that the paintings up until the Impressionist period were probably like a window. And it was a window into the landscape. The portrait is still like a window. You're looking into the reality because there was no camera at that time, no photography.
Right.
So that was the camera, was the painting. So that's why the most so vivid detail. So that was really unique what he was doing, and that was in the 16th century. If I remember right, you're familiar with history,
Yes.
so
Yes.
and so seeing that painting in real life, and that was the only painting in the room at the Prado, and they had two lights coming from either side, and it was just, you're like literally like you feel like you're part of the painting. So that, and then the idea of cubism that Picasso did, back in the turn of the century, the idea that you have multiple perspectives. And there's a quote. Later, I ended up starting an art magazine. Another thing I did, called Art Lies, and we came up with that name before we found out that Picasso. There's a quote by him that said, "Art is made up of lies in order to get closer to the truth."
Hmm.
And then I mentioned this to my class. I said, that different perspectives. There's you're familiar with Akira Kurosawa, the Japanese filmmaker. He's dead. He's like 50s, 60s, 70s.
Okay.
Last Seven Samurai.
Yes, yes.
And the Magnificent Seven is based on that.
Right.
So Kurosawa did a movie called Rashomon, and there's these. And I know that I mentioned this, or I didn't mention it, but I mentioned it earlier, that most of the people that I mentioned as being influences are all male. Because mostly males were in the art world. There are females there.
Right.
But in this movie, there's a bunch of males who are around a campfire. And they're all telling their perspective of one story. And it varies from person to person as they go around the campfire telling the story.
Right.
And they go into the scene that they're describing as in the movie. So the idea that they're all telling the same story, but from their perspective, which is very slightly different from everybody else's. So you have all these different perspectives to get closer to that truth. To me, that's another thing, and to me, that just how that cubism was, to me, another is like a genius thing, and I know that Picasso has gotten, been revised because of how he treated his women, because he was terrible at it.
Yes.
But as an artist, he was brilliant, just a lousy human being.
You mentioned, right, but you mentioned that they're telling the story from their perspective.
On the other aspect of that, other artists that I actually do know and did meet, so like Luis Jimenez, who he was the first Chicano artist to have a one-person show at the Contemporary Arts Museum in Houston in the mid-'70s. And I met him before he had that show, and he was a big influence because of who he was and the kind of work he was doing. And later, I curated a 30-year retrospective of his work that opened at the Dallas Museum and traveled for 2.5 years around the country.
Wow. And
then Mel Chin was an artist who I actually met in the art club in high school, at Bel Air High School, who we barely met because we had a photo session at one of the galleries in Houston in 1970. And so we shook hands and didn't see each other until 5 years later when he was at the Art Barn. And we met again and we became good friends. And I recently curated a show, which was my last show as a curator here at UTA. I co-curated with Christina Reese. But I wanted to end my time here because there was another show of Mel's that I curated back in 1995, 96, that traveled around for 2 years and came to the Irving Art Center. So when I came here, those two shows were here. So I wanted to leave the Gallery GTA with those two artists who had influenced me, not for those times, but the idea that their artwork as well, because like Mel received a MacArthur Fellowship. He also has been the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and he just won a Hiroshima Prize.
Wow.
So and then Luis, his work is in major museums collections. There's, we did that show here. He's still, revered for the work that he was doing. Still a huge influence on me. And then other artists like Cesar Martinez, who I still know, and then Celia Munoz here in Arlington, who showed at the Whitney Museum, had a retrospective at the Museum of Contemporary Art in La Jolla. So all these people that are artists that I know, and there's many more that are friends of mine, and they're even more important because I can actually talk with them.
Right, so they can influence you more deeply
Yeah,
than some
yeah,
of
we can
these
talk
others.
to each other about each other's work and what's
Okay,
going
that
on.
makes sense.
So,
So after, we're kind of backing up again a little bit, I think. After grad school, what happened? What did you do?
um, I moved to San Francisco,
Hmm,
music scene.
right.
I was halfway there, so I thought I might as well move there.
Right.
My father asked me the question, why did you move to San Francisco a few years before he died? And I said, well, he said, why did you move to San Francisco? And I said, well, remember when we were in Corpus and you were talking about, you were thinking of moving, you said that you were thinking of moving to either Houston or San Francisco. And I thought, we missed out San Francisco in the 60s,
Mm-hmm.
and I still love music, and there's still a lot of music going on, and I wanted to be there. And I've never been. I started seeing it in the movies. And so I told him that, and then he said, I never said San Francisco. I said either Houston or San Antonio. So there you have it.
Right. Would you have changed it?
No, I think I'm rather good. My father loves San Antonio, but I moved to San Francisco because of the music scene
Yes.
and went to a lot of concerts there.
Mm-hmm.
I got a job at a wholesale frame warehouse in South San Francisco. Lived there for 2 years. Became manager of the warehouse after about 4 months. And then at that time, another transition in my work happened.
Mm-hmm.
So before I moved to San Francisco in 1977, it's a big year, I'm sure, for a lot of people, I went and saw Star Wars,
Mm-hmm.
the first one.
Right.
And I thought, if George Lucas could make money off Star Wars, I could make money off flying chalupas. So I started doodling little, like chalupas, like really like little chalupas that were flying through the air, doodle them on, postcards and letters. And then like I got to trouble, like at one of the apartments I was living at in graduate school had one of those things that are cheap reproduction of a horse and a pond and trees. And so I did a chalupa drawing, cut it out, pasted it on, took it to school, put it in the hallway because they were asking graduate students to put their artwork so people could see it. My chair of my committee got really upset about that one. So anyway, when I got to San Francisco, I thought, maybe I should think of this seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how would I go about it? So that was really a time that I said, it's something that I know how to make because I used to make them at the restaurant.
I see. Okay.
I always eaten them.
Uh-huh. Right.
It's Mexican food, so it's about identity. So I started doing that. And then one of the things I did in graduate school, because we were close to El Paso, Juarez, I would see the black velvet painting, so I had started painting on velvet. So I couldn't paint on velvet when I was in San Francisco because I had a studio apartment, slightly, maybe a little bit bigger than this, maybe almost as twice the size.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't paint in there, so I just did drawings, but I used black Arches paper and did color pencils, so they had that kind of luminosity on the black.
Mm-hmm.
And then later I painted them on velvet when I moved to Houston after I lived in New York for a little while. And so the first ones I did were charcoal. Just started to draw it left to right like a newspaper, top to bottom, until I filled it. Mm-hmm. And then there were a couple of things that I changed here and there, and I just called them flying chalupas. And then the second one, I used it on the black Arches paper, and then did a gridded line in pencil, and then like they're in compartments. And I think that was in relationship that I was living in an apartment in a building, like third floor. And so I think that, those kind, and then I started thinking about, the conceptual and art practices as far as how to take this and create a system of this and create work from that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, which enabled me to make work for a few years based on the chalupas.
Just a series.
A series of chalupas.
And this is not flippant at all. The Flying Burrito Brothers had no influence on this.
But I knew of the Flying Burrito Brothers. Yes,
Right.
it's because I remember I have a company named Flying Chalupa Productions, and I have checks with that. And I remember writing a check, and I remember somebody who's taking the check. Oh, you heard of Flying Burrito Brothers? And said, yeah, I know of them. So.
Mm-hmm.
And
that they were big in that scene.
Yeah, they were big.
Well before you got there.
And I have to say, one of my biggest regrets. I'm a big Neil Young fan.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1973, Neil Young played in Houston at the Coliseum, and Linda Ronstadt opened for him. And afterwards, they went to Liberty Hall, where I had not gone. I'd gone to before a couple of times, but had not. The Springsteen show that I saw was a year later. But Liberty Hall had Graham Parsons and Emmylou Harris, who's his girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
And a friend of mine, that was Saturday night, a friend of mine called me Sunday and said, you need to come to Liberty Hall tonight. And I said, why? He says, I can't tell you, you need to just come. And I said, I'm really tired. I didn't go. Well, it turns out both nights, Neil Young and his band and Linda Ronstadt went to Liberty Hall. And then later, Ben Fong Torres with Rolling Stone wrote about them playing at the Rice Hotel until all hours in the morning. And where a year earlier in '72, the Rolling Stones had booked the Rice Hotel. And that was a concert that I helped bring to Houston with a promoter from Denver. So the Rice Hotel was important because, and then we put up John Prine there too. So I really regret not taking my friend's advice and going to Liberty Hall and seeing this kind of historic.
Right. So there was a connection to the Flying Burrito.
Yeah, there was a connection, and then Linda Ronstadt was in the Kennedy Honors Award. Emmylou Harris was one of the presenters.
Yes.
Did you see
that?
They
were in a group together.
She said in 1973, I met Linda Ronstadt at Liberty Hall.
Oh my goodness! Wow, and you missed it. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
So
you know what I'm not going to do?
What is that?
I'm not going to cut my ear off.
No. Well, I would hope not. At least not at this point, and not here.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about how your art has evolved over the decades, and then talk a little bit about the symbolism or imagery in your art.
I think that in graduate school, as I mentioned earlier, was a time of experimentation because I'd only been making art for 2 years. And I also liked lithography, which is printmaking process. At that time, I was doing all kinds of different things. It was like I was trying to figure out how to grow up in a lot of ways. And I also did kind of like sculptural elements. I did kind of installation kinds of things. Aside from the curatorial things I mentioned, I also did a tie competition, so I did that, and one of the prizes was one of my paintings and so on. So I was doing a lot of different things, and I think when I went to San Francisco, it feels like in undergraduate it was like learning, and then in the last year I felt like I hit a stride in the sense of like you had an idea, and I was following it through. And then when I went to graduate school, it was to somehow incorporate humor and seriousness together,
Right.
and but at the same time to play. It was like play and experiment and fail and do all kinds of different things. When I went to San Francisco, the idea of creating, to figuring out my own identity in a sense became paramount. And then alongside the chalupas, at a certain point, I started integrating images, images that were reflective of things I experienced and that other people might experience, things that are more universal, and then things that are more personal. So, so those things start kind of combining. And then what I was also trying to do is in graduate school was like it's like a scattershot effect. You're doing different things all at the same time. With in San Francisco was to, and part of it was because had my limitations in space, so I couldn't paint. So I had to think about how do I proceed, and how do I put one foot in front of the other in my work, as in the sense of this progression, linear progression. For most artists, that is the thing that is kind of talked about is the artist usually has people think the artist usually has an idea, and probably the best example is probably Monet. And traditionally, a landscape painter doing paintings this big and maybe smaller, and then when he started doing the landscape, they were trying to be looking like a landscape. And then all of a sudden he started doing impressionist work, things that what he saw and the impression he saw and painted that, which was a further evolution of the landscape. And then from that to enlarge the paintings, even got larger. And even though there were like a lot of them were the lily ponds in his estate, he painted them in a way that they became more abstract. From a distance, you could kind of see their forms in the water lilies in the water. But as you get up closer, they became these brushstrokes, and they became really painterly. So that is kind of thought of as like the linear progression of an idea for an artist. For me, because my head is a little more screwy, I kind of jump. I think that the graduate school experience was something that I enjoyed a lot because of the playfulness. What I enjoyed about the chalupas was the progression and the evolution of that idea. And then at a certain point, as I mentioned, I started painting them on velvet. But at a certain time, I felt like I needed to evolve even more. So I started doing line drawings of the images and even the chalupas, and then taking these and blowing them up and overlapping them. Because before, as I mentioned, people would read my drawings and paintings as a newspaper, left to right, top to bottom. So by taking this idea and overlapping these images, they become more abstract because they're not easily read. And then I started incorporating other materials for the surface and textures in the paintings. And so as a result, when you see them, the impact is of the work overall, and then you start looking closely.
Right.
So, and then after that point, in the early 90s, it was when, I need to start playing around. So I got a visiting artist position at East Carolina University from 1990 1991. I had a one-person show at the Contemporary Arts Museum in 1990, right before I left in April. And this was the same museum that had the Luis Jimenez show. Luis Jimenez was brought in, and we did a dialogue about my show and my work. So this was kind of like
Interesting.
this,
Yeah.
tying these, going full circle.
Yes, right.
So when I went to East Carolina University in Greenville, North Carolina, and I was there for a year, I decided to do smaller works and just do anything that comes to mind and not think of it's like a good idea or bad idea. just do it, just paint it, just get it out there. And I remember that somebody said that when you're younger, it's always good to, like somebody who's planting the field, put your seeds down early, and then, basically all your ideas come from the early age,
Right.
and then you just cultivate them later on.
Okay.
So, but I wanted to plant more seeds,
Right.
so more ideas. I didn't want to. I always kind of feel one of the things that barometers in my head that happens with my work is when I feel like I'm getting bored, it's time to move on to other kinds of work. So, so that's kind of like where my head goes. So I started kind of doing different things. I had a show that the department, August Davis, the current chair, said when I told her that I was going to retire, she offered me to have a one-person show there at the gallery as my parting gift. And I said, I'd like to do that, but also, you've been to the gallery. So the enclosed gallery, I said, I'd like to show the collaborative work of my wife and I do.
Yes.
Which is
yes.
very different, which you saw in the brochure. So, so that work doesn't get seen, but that work is very different. And so it was like to show these different facets of the work that I do. And my wife is an artist in her own right. We just had a 2-person show with my gallery in Dallas this last December to January. And then we're having another show in April of our individual works. But again, it's the collaborative work is something interesting in the sense that when I came up here, I bought a mid-century modern house, and then became enamored with the architecture of the house, and started thinking about architecture. And because I'm a homeowner now, I have to like fix the house every so often. So you start thinking about all these things. So you start thinking about the construction materials. So like that house is made out of redwood.
Yes. Okay.
Which is, there's several houses around that are made out of redwood. I've seen redwood fences, and now you can't get redwood. I mean, it's really, really expensive because they're trying to reforest the redwood trees in California. But so when my wife applied for a show at the Fort Worth Community Arts Center in 2010, we didn't know what we were going to do. And then she went to Germany for a month for a residency. And during that time, I developed some ideas about the kind of collaboration ideas. And then she came up with some ideas. And then when she got back, we had about maybe 6 weeks to make it happen.
How did you meet her?
She was here at UTA.
Oh, okay.
She was single and had 3 kids. I was in my mid-40s and she was in her mid to late 30s. So so we met, and then we knew something was going on. There was some chemistry, but she wanted to go to graduate school. She went to TCU graduate school, and then after she graduated, that's when we got involved. But I was still having other relationships during the early stage. But there was like, once she got out, once she graduated, several months later, I think we started getting involved. And then we got married in 2005.
Had you been married before?
Nope.
So you had been single up to that time, but she'd been married before.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a lost soul. It took me a while to find myself.
Right. I understand completely. Talk a little bit about the political and social themes that exist within your art, and how do you choose those themes?
Sometimes a lot of those things are things that I embed in the work. There was a lot of the work that when I was telling you where I was going from the chalupa drawings, paintings, and then doing that abstraction. In a lot of that work, there was one painting that I did called Corazón Sagrado, which is Sacred Heart. I grew up in the Catholic Church, but as I mentioned, I moved away from religion, period. But at the same time, some of the imagery from that, I mean, like I told you about the pornography show and how we
Yes.
did, then that was the idea of veiling, art. So in this one, one of the things that I mentioned earlier in an interview back in the 80s, I said when I was in school, people had these holy cards. They had religious imagery. But the imagery that, I found enthralling was the one where Christ's hand is out and there's a heart and it's floating above his hand and it's on fire. And I thought, oh, well, I could say now that it looks very surrealist. It's a very surrealist imagery, but it made a real strong impact on me. There was a show called The Mind's Eye at the Museum of Fine Arts. This is before I even started painting, and there were a lot of artists in that. It was about surrealism, but it was kind of more broad. And there was a Jasper Johns painting that I saw for the first time. It was number 5. It's one that's at the Manil now on permanent loan. And it was like, what is this? It's just the number 5. And then caustic, in which my wife works in encaustic paint. It's an encaustic, but I didn't know my wife did.
Right.
So I thought this was interesting that how the surface of the painting, is, as you could see it through layers. But there was another artist, aside from Magritte and Paul Devereaux and a bunch of other surrealists, there was another artist by the name of Felician Ropes, or Rops. It might be Belgian, but I'm not sure. There was it was basically, I think they're prints. And it was a crucifixion scene, Christ on the cross. This is what was interesting for me. The devil was around the cross and masturbating the Christ figure. And I thought, this is in the museum, first of all. And then I'm seeing this, and it's like the idea of something that would be very controversial, but it's like the power of the image. Now the power of the words is the power of the image. So that goes back to the idea of the mind's eye. So for me, going back to race, when we moved to Houston, I was 13, and I was walking down the street, and I remember a car was coming by, and this white guy was rolling down his window, and he yelled at me and said the N-word at me. I never heard it before. And I just but the way he said it, I knew that there was I did something wrong, or I was wrong or something.
Right.
And found out later, what it meant. And so, and then all the stories I heard about with my parents, my father particularly, and those issues didn't just go away. There were still other ones. So all those kinds of things, were happening. And then, when I was going to junior high, I remember being picked on. I didn't know anybody at school. Then somebody come over and start pushing me around because they didn't like the way I looked. So I didn't see many people of my color at that junior high.
Okay.
There were not even many blacks at that time at the Jane Long Junior High School. So it all of a sudden became really familiar with what was going on with our society.
So these things are like building blocks in a way,
right,
that are leading you toward something that needs to be expressed.
Yeah. So so some of those things, like the painting that I did, the last painting I did in undergraduate school with a black kid, and then that, I mean, to me,
Can you discuss some of your works that are maybe more meaningful? Is that possible to do? Do you have works that mean more to you than other works?
Yes yes and no. I mean, it's kind of like they're kind of intertwined. Sometimes they're intertwined because they're like the portrait of my father was important
Mm-hmm.
because it dealt with the idea of the distance between us at that time, the emotional distance. And so that was an important work for me. And I remember he and one of my younger brothers, came to my graduate show, and he didn't like the painting. And then I had offered him the painting later, and then he said a few years later, he said, "I'll take the painting now." And then he got burglarized and said, "You better take the painting back," because they took I gave him my university ring, and also I gave him the high school ring, and they stole the university ring, but he still had the high school ring. So that one, and then the one with the kid, I think was important. And then there was a painting that I did. I read a book, a collected poems of Rilke, and in there was a kind of like a little essay. I forgot who the writer was, but he's fairly well known. But it's just been a while since I. But he talked about like some of the roots or ideas behind Rilke's poems, and he talked about this philosopher from the 18th century by the name of Novalis. And Novalis had said something and he had said something that there are like two parts to an artist's evolution. One is to kind of like, in a sense, basically, kind of paraphrase this, to figure who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And the second is to figure out what their relationship is to the world. So it's like this, like you, like looking inside of you, looking internally, figure out what is the principles that you live by,
Mm-hmm.
and what are you about. And then the second part is how do you apply that to the world, and how does the world, how do you interface with that world. So I think that was real important to me. And so there was a painting that I did called Antonio, which is after one of his poems. It's called Autumn, because that's what it means. And in there's the poem is about, I think it's about despair, and it's about these leaves falling. So in this painting, I have male and female body parts that are like, they're kind of like the leaves, they're falling.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a big, it's really interesting to say the word die, but it's die from dice. So it's a
Okay.
singular die.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that shape overall the whole thing. So because I think of like life is a game of chance in a sense. So I used a lot of materials. I used straw and encaustic paint, and as well as oil paint. And there's a really thick texture to this. And then I used a torch to create a kind of a whirlwind kind of a motif around it.
Mm-hmm.
So I created that, and then in the poem, the leaves are trying to be stopped by a pair of hands,
Mm.
like the person that's experiencing this is trying to keep these leaves from falling completely to the ground.
Mm.
So the sense is trying to save that.
Mm.
So at the bottom of the painting, there's my fingerprints, actual fingerprints from using paint. So that painting to me was important because it was kind of even more so than the earlier paintings that I did in the last year in graduate school. We're dealing with that sense of despair, and I had just had a breakup with somebody, and so it was kind of like dealing with that kind of pain,
I see.
where you feel like you question yourself, and you're like you're no good because they don't want you, and that kind of thing. All the things that you go through when you
Yeah,
break
sure.
up.
Right. Yeah.
But it was like, how do you express that in a work of art? So that was to me was an important. It's not about being aesthetically beautiful. It was just like it was like more grittier in that regard. But and then I remember around that same time, I came across a quote by Baudelaire, and he was talking about that beauty is strange. And I think that's true, that beauty is always kind of evolving, because as we're evolving, we're seeing new and new images. We redefine what is beauty.
Yes.
So it's kind of like it's an ever-changing form. So to me, that kind of like was important. So that painting is an important one. Corazón Sagrado was important. Um, I think that some pieces deal with certain issues that I think are, again, dealing with what's happening in the world. Some recent works, and I think there's a couple that were in this show here at UTA because of things that our 45th president said at the time, disparaging Mexicans, because my father's Mexican American. Mexican, I mean, literally he's Mexican and became an American citizen. I felt like there's been, like, when I was in high school applying to go to University of Houston, they had the breakdown of race, that you're either other, Caucasian, Negro, Eskimo, and Indian. And I didn't feel like I fit in any of those. So I checked off other.
Okay.
And then I asked my mother at the time, it's like, are we the other people talk about? I said,
Right.
you know those other people.
Others. Yes.
So it's kind of like dealing with that. So that idea happened in a piece called Shades of Brown, and then in parentheses, value scale. So it's all the words that, all the different categories that define my community. So you have other, you have Latino, Latina, Chicano, Mexican American, Hispanic. So all those terms are in there. And so, and the color range is almost from a light tan, a very light tan, to the darkest brown. So, and then it's the value scale. That's why it's called value scale.
I see.
So different, and I remember that Luis did a sculpture called Chesta Dancers. That was in the show that I curated. There's the two dancers, and they have like a darker skin color. And it was one of one of his pieces. He does an edition of 5 large-scale sculpture, larger than life. And one of them was in the border of Tijuana. It's on the San Diego side of the border. And he said that there was some controversy about it, but there was from the Mexican side. And they said, and he said, I bet you I know what the controversy is about. And he said, I bet you it's about the skin color. It's too dark. Because like indigenous people in Mexico are darker skinned. So it's probably that,
Interesting. Yeah.
So they didn't want to be represented by darker skin. So those kinds of concerns, as still I think of my work. There's another piece that I just did for the show here at UTA. It's there. It's called the South Face. And if you see the logo, the North Face, you see a lot of people wearing coats that have the North Face.
Right.
So I was thinking of, you take that curve that goes like on this side, it curves like this. It's and then there's like 3 stripes, yeah. So I thought, like, if you think of Mexico, the west side of Mexico, it creates a curve. So I thought, why not do the South Face? And then here have people who are trying to cross the border, and you have the fence that we've been talking about it politically in the last several years. So the South Face, so that's what that piece is about. And I collaborated with a design person here at GTA, who I've known for most of the time that they've been at GTA. And so we worked together on it. It was kind of a collaboration. I thought it would be good to collaborate with somebody in that regard, because my design skills are different now than what they
Right.
were back then.
Right.
So we worked together really well, but that was a thing. The other one was the piece that's right there, that's in the brochure of the portrait of me that Andrew did, Andrew Ortiz. It's called Taking a Shot at My Image. And I actually, that's almost full scale. And I used a .22 handgun to shoot
Oh, I see.
a hole into that image.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea was that people, see you on the surface because that's what they see.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Right.
when I look in the mirror, I see the way I
Yes.
look. But when we're looking now, we don't see
Mm.
ourselves. We,
Right.
see the other person.
Right.
But so twice, and I alluded this in the interview with August in our talk,
Mm-hmm.
gallery talk. After 9/11 happened, I was walking down our street. I live on near Central Arlington, so I was walking down Davis Street, and then I was turning around, going back, and it was just for exercise.
Mm-hmm.
And another car stops, and this guy, he looks at me, and and Davis is pretty big between the university and what is it, Arkansas.
Mm-hmm.
It widens up where the elementary school is, and it goes like this. And he thought, oh, he thinks I'm probably Muslim because my skin color.
Hmm.
And then after October 7th, 2 weeks later, I'm in my carport just gotten out of my car, and there's a bunch of people at a street light, and one of them says, "Why don't you go effing kill yourself?" And I thought, oh, they think I'm Palestinian now.
This is in your neighborhood?
Yes, my neighborhood. That one's right in my carport in my house.
Right.
The other
Wow.
one's several blocks down from where I live.
But still in your neighborhood.
Yeah. A few years back, there was a couple that would come up from Austin and spend New Year's Eve with us. And one day, New Year's was Saturday, and Sunday I go for a walk, and it's winter, and so I have like kind of sweatpants and this shirt, a long sleeve shirt, and I had a hoodie.
Mm-hmm.
And I usually go down to there's a convenience store that I go to and get a Dallas Morning News because I like to read the newspaper. And so I buy a newspaper and walk out, and this cop car comes up, and he says, two cops get out. One goes inside. One comes up to me and says, "Can you stop right where you are? I'd like to talk to you." And I'm used to this because over my lifetime, probably been stopped probably anywhere between 40 times or so, give or take.
Really?
And the majority of them more racial profiling than actual tickets. I have gotten tickets. I mean, I'm not a,
You're not a saint.
Sometimes I drive too fast,
Okay.
Sometimes I didn't get my old truck inspected,
Right.
But this time it was like, and I said, well, I'm pretty like, what's going on? He says, well, you look like somebody we're looking for. And I said, they've got a report that somebody was trying to break in next door, and their description, fits it. And I told him, well, I live like one street light down, thinking that might help, because why would I be
Right.
And then why would I come back anyway to buy a newspaper if I was trying to break in next door? And so because I heard that they didn't get to break in. So I would go. They thought that the thief would go and get some money from their home to come back and buy a newspaper, and not in the car, but to come in and walk. So and then as I was about to say, well, I also work at GTA. Maybe that will help. And then the other cop came out and goes like that. So I said, I'm sorry to bother you. And left.
Strange.
Yeah. but those things have happened,
And they impact.
and they impact my thinking about
Right.
what I do.
Yes.
Sometimes directly. There was another piece that in 1993 I did, and it had to do with pro-choice, because I'm pro-choice. I did I took a coat hanger and created the ovaries, and then the shape, the whole shape, and then I took material to make them look like they're kind of rusted, and then put them in a velvet lined box and made it look like a historical item, and I titled it 1973, comma before, because you've heard of women who got abortion because they couldn't afford abortion, so they had, hangers. And so I did that piece, and it was in a show, and my gallerist, that's when I was still living in Houston before I came up here, and my gallerist had taken out an ad in the National Art Magazine, and she said, would we split the cost of doing that? I said, yeah. And then she said, well, how about if I take this piece? I said, okay, I thought it's a good piece, but that's fine, because at least it has a home. And then it coincidentally turns out that she got to meet Sarah Weddington, who is the lawyer for Jane Roe.
Right.
And so she gave it to her. So, but it's again those kinds of things you hear. You know about people who have abortions, things that don't go right. So all these things have become like topics for my work.
Right.
So some people ask, where do you get your ideas? Well, you get them from everywhere.
Everywhere. Right.
You can get them from a book, you can get them from newspaper, you can get them from talking to somebody.
You've done murals. How are your murals, and how is that process different, other than in scale, obviously?
I haven't done really, in the traditional sense, I haven't done a mural on a wall, a large wall. I've done mural-sized paintings, and I'm storing a few of those. But I like, I've always liked large-scale works, but I've also done public art. And public art, like, did you get to see the piece here on campus? Well, there's also some at the on Vickery Street, just south of 30 on to Magnolia. There's 6 sculptures there. They're cone shape, kind of similar to the idea here, but different in as far as imagery is concerned. And then I did the piece at the airport, which is a terrazzo floor design for the Skylink on Terminal D.
Right.
So if you go on the Skylink on Terminal D, there's 2 stations there. If either one, if you walked on it, you walked on my work.
Wow.
Yeah, we walked all over.
Didn't even know. I just walked all over it. Sorry.
So it's okay. So, but I like public art because because people do interact with it.
Right.
I mean, if you're walking by or walking on it, it's like they're interacting with it, and I like that part of it. And it's art in the community, and they don't have to pay to see it.
Do you have a favorite medium?
No, traditionally I'm a painter, but I also like making prints. I enjoy the process. I don't like making the prints myself. I used to when I was in school, but it's a lot of technical skill, and I enjoy working again with printmakers because it's a collaborative thing. They can help me in how to get my ideas out even better technically as far as printmaking. So I work with some really good printmakers, and I really enjoy that process. It's just like when you're curating, I work with an artist when I'm showing their work. So it's kind of getting to know, get into their head about what their work is about. And I enjoy that part. I enjoy that social aspect of it. But I told somebody it's like curating is like breathing in, and being an artist is like breathing out.
Huh. That's interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting way to
So
look at it. Yeah.
talking with other artists about their work makes me think about my work, and makes me think even more about the concepts and the processes.
You've done commissioned works?
Um, I've done works that have been commissioned in the sense of like public art stuff.
And how do you balance that with your own work? I mean, is there a struggle? This commission is it like a task to carry out this
No,
commission?
I like challenges.
Okay.
So it's like I like working in different mediums that I've never worked in before. Like when I did the pieces in Fort Worth came
Yes.
before. So I never worked in stainless steel in that scale. And that was like 10 feet high. They're slightly off the ground and they're cone shape. And then this one here is 21 feet high. So it's like I couldn't do that myself. If I knew how to do that, all
Right.
the welding, I still need somebody. I need a crane to pick it up and take it over, and then I would have to learn how to weld. And I mean, it's like you get your
Crane
ideas.
operator.
Yeah. But I like going back and making paintings because it's like it's hands-on and
Yes.
printmaking. It's a collaboration. So I like that part of it. But I like challenges. And I think that I had some questions from people about my work because I used to use a lot of different materials in my work when I was just, the two-dimensional and smaller sculptures and stuff and experiment with surfaces. And they said, you don't do that anymore. I mean, maybe you should think about doing something because they like that. And I said, if you look at our collaborative work,
Right.
it's all there.
Right.
So it frees me up. Not that I don't want to still do these other things. It's just that it frees me up because I have to think of it in three-dimensional forms and in two-dimensional forms because architecture is that way. So
Right.
I just did a talk for an architecture class last Tuesday.
Really?
Yeah, so it was interesting to get their feedback about my work, that the collaborative work. I showed them a few images from our two-person show, my wife's and I, but the architectural work they were really surprised.
What have been some of the reactions to your work that surprised you?
It's hard to say. A good reaction. I had a show. That the show that I had at Contemporary Arts Museum got picked up and it traveled for a couple of years, and it was at the San Jose Museum. And at the opening, there was this man came up to me and he wanted to know about this small piece, and it was called V. And it had like a bird, and I used, and then it had a top part, and I used gunpowder to create a halo and lit the gunpowder. And I had used gouache, gold gouache with black ink mixed together to create the coloration, which was just kind of murky goldish color. And it had to do with Valdez, a ship that spilled out all
Right.
that oil. So
Yes,
that's what
the
that was
Exxon
about.
Valdez, yeah.
So that's what I told him. This is what this work is about, and it was a small piece. And later on at the reception, he came up to me and said, "How much is that piece?" And I told him the value of it, just with the frame and all that, and didn't think anything of it. And then later on, as I was walking back into the gallery from the lobby area where the reception was, he just stuck a check in my pocket.
Wow.
So that was the best reaction I ever
All
had.
right, okay.
The purest reaction that somebody really liked that work.
Yes.
And just like,
Right.
I had to have it. The other kinds of reactions I've had were, I remember a former girlfriend of mine and a good friend of mine asked me, what did I have to do to get the show at the Contemporary Arts Museum? My one person. And they were insinuating that I sleep with a curator. And I thought, are you saying that my work did not deserve to be at the Contemporary Arts Museum. That the only way I could. And so it turns out that that
Wow.
rumor was around. And so that was like, I didn't know how to take it. You know, it was just like, and I'm glad my two friends told me because it was out there. And so those things happened. It turns out that the art world, just like the rest of the world, you know,
Right.
it's like the more public you become, the more of a target you become.
Yes.
So, um, so that was like, after that is when I went to Greenville, North Carolina for a year,
Right.
and then a wholly different body of work.
Right.
I've had adverse reaction to the work. I mean, people, there was a review of a show that I was in 1985, and basically just trashed the painting that I had, and with good reason. It wasn't at my best work. I understand that. You know, it made me think about the work. The work still exists, but it changed after that.
I see.
And it was like, part of it was I realized that the part of the work was this boy humor that I realized did not really cut it. And so I needed to, like, okay, I need to change this. And I changed it. It took about 5 years, and it was a subtle change, but it made a huge difference. And now a collector of mine in San Antonio owns that piece, and just showed it recently at Art Pace. But I mean, you know, I've had reviews that have been bad reviews.
Do you read your reviews?
Yeah, I read them. I'm curious. I mean, you know, it's like you see your name in the
Yes.
print.
Do you let them go to your head though?
No, I think this was interesting. The show that I did in 1983 in Houston was called Aneurysm. And when I was in East Carolina University, I was doing all these different things, and I just did things that came to my head. And because I think that I was talking about linear progression that artists do most of the time, but I think there are other artists who do that have different ideas that don't fit their work.
I see.
You know, the work that they're known for.
Yes.
And so they don't show that work, or they don't even do that work. They try, but they have these other ideas.
Right.
So I thought of it as like, so when I did that show, I decided to do these paintings, but and then I had 4 larger paintings that were really finished. I mean, you know, they were all conceptually sound, but I thought that aneurysm is a blockage, and that creates is an aneurysm. So I felt that if you don't clear that blockage, you're going to suffer. So for me, was to clear the blockage was to do whatever I wanted, and not worry about the consequences. And so there were 3 reviews. The local newspaper basically thought I was just this young painter who just, you know, did whatever he wanted. You know, just like, you know, just real facile, could do, you know, it didn't take the works that, you know, maybe pointed 1 or 2 pieces that they thought was good. The rest of the show was not so good. The other review was in the middle of the road. It was a weekly, and it was like, there's some work in there that I don't want to know about Benito's personal sex life kind of thing. And then other work is like, this is really great. So it's like this this dichotomy in the review. Then there was a review in a national art magazine called Art Forum. And that review was really good. They didn't really want to know what the work was about. They just liked the work. They just liked the visual, which was the beginning trend of something new in art as far as thinking. Is not, because there was in the 80s, there was a bunch of a lot of German expressionist artists that are coming out that were dealing with World War II and the German guilt. And so there was this really heavy kind of content that was coming out at that time by a lot of artists. Anselm Kiefer, like the modern owns like 3 or 4 Anselm Kiefer works. and then Joseph Beuys, who's kind of like a teacher for a lot of these younger artists. So there's like this heaviness, and so there's a lot of that permeated in the art world in the United States. So I think there was this kind of like, let's kind of lighten up, even though some of the works were not like. One of the pieces that I've been mentioning was a painting that I did that was that I turned it on an angle, made it a diamond shape, and it's called Sister Psychosis. And I read this article in the newspaper that along the border in the Rio Grande, because we have these companies that go on the other side, and they have the maquiladores, which are factories,
Okay.
and they have no EPA in Mexico, so they are polluting like the Rio Grande. So it turns out that a lot of babies were born without a brainstem because of the pollution in the water. And this is called, and it's a tapeworm that invades the brain, basically. So it leads to that. So it's called cysticercosis. So I used the medical name for that painting. So it's this, I saw this movie. I like old movies. It's called, I don't know why I remember the movie, but I remember the trailer. The trailer was about a movie called All About Eve. Henry Fonda and Barbara Stanwyck. And during the trailer of that movie, they show a pole with a snake going around the pole, and it had a top hat. The snake's head was at the bottom, and it had a top hat, and the tail had like, it looked like a glove with a rattle, like a baby's rattle. So it's a rattler. So I used that image in the painting, and then did a painting of a brain, and then use large circles of primary and secondary colors around, and then put a dark gray stain over the whole painting before I painted the snake and the pole over it, so that the brain was murky.
Right.
So that creativity became murky. So, and then you have this, like, it looks like a duck's head, not a snake's head, with a top hat. And so it's like, kind of like, hey, I got money for you if you build these factories over here,
Right.
but this is what's going to happen, what we do. So dealing with those issues and embedded in there, but the clue there is the title of the piece.
Do you care if people miss the point? I mean, if they like your work but they don't really understand the meaning behind it, does that matter to you?
Well, my feeling is that if the painting's good enough, let me put it this way, if the painting's good enough visually, that it attracts you to the work, you'll want to learn more about it.
I see.
And I think the painting should work on many different levels, not just the visual level. So I don't see art as just pure decoration, which it can be. It's, I sometimes think that, I tell my students, I said, when you go to the museum, part of the reason you're going to the museum is for entertainment. That's part of what we do.
Yes.
But I think art is more than just entertainment. It's about ideas. And so that to me is when it's just pure decoration, it's decoration. Art is about more than just decoration. It's about ideas. Ideas could be formal ideas about art, or ideas about what's happening in our lives. And so I like to play all those different levels, and sometimes play them off of each other.
But if somebody doesn't get it, then that's okay.
That's okay. I mean, it's there's. Let me put it this way: there's some people who think about what they see and read, and some people don't.
What if they put their own meaning into it?
That's going to happen, and sometimes I mind that meaning for my own work. So when somebody comes and says, I see this painting, and this is what I think of the painting, and I'm open to hearing them. I'm not going to say, no, you can't tell me. This is what this is. And so they tell me, and I said, oh, I never thought of that. That's a good idea. I'll take it. I'll use it in the next painting.
Right. So let's skip up forward a little bit to your career as an educator, and particularly here at UTA. How did you come to UTA?
I'll back up just a little bit.
Okay.
The show that I curated of Luis Jimenez was going to open up here in May of '97 at the Dallas Museum. the Mel Chin show that I curated was already traveling. It was going to come at the Irving Art Center in July of '97. I got asked to curate a show at the Dallas Visual Arts Center in January of '97. And I was asked as a result of, because people knew that I was going to be curating the Luis Jimenez show, I was asked by the people at the Bathhouse Cultural Center in Dallas to have a show of my own work at the Bathhouse in May of '97. Around late February, early March, I got a call from Dalton Maroney, who was a professor, he was a sculptor professor here at the art department. I had met him in 1986 because he had a show in Houston at Bill Graham Gallery, and so I see his work here and there, and he called me up and said, "We're looking for somebody who could teach and also curate." And there was only one other person I knew, was Kathy Vargas down in San Antonio, who was a photographer, a really good photographer, and she also curated. And so I recommended her, and then there's not very many people who do have those two hats. And then I said, I'll throw my hat in the ring. Because at that time I was looking to buy a house in Houston, or a place to build a studio and living. And when this came up, I was familiar with the gallery since it opened in 1986, because I curated a show in 1985 that brought me up here. And Celia Munoz picked me up at the bus station, and she showed me the gallery that first year it opened. And then every once in a while when I came back, we would go to the gallery and see it change over time. So I was familiar with the gallery, and there was a time that they were looking for somebody for a year, and a resident to be a visiting artist for a year. And then I was being interviewed for that. This is prior to that. And they decided, after they interviewed me, that they wanted to break it down to one person for one semester, person for the next semester. And I said, I can't do that, because it would make a problem for my studio, because I couldn't rent somebody for just a few months. They would probably want at least a year.
Right.
So I turned it down. So when it came up for this position for renting the gallery and teaching painting, I said, yeah, I'm interested. So Dalton later told me, a few years later, said, when you said yes, they said you were it from that point in.
So how do you think that teaching then has affected your art, your practice?
As a curator or as an artist?
As an artist.
As an artist, I think that it's mostly the other way around.
I see.
I think my being an artist and being in the field actively, and still active through even now, has helped me help the students in educating them on what's out there. As a curator, it's also helped me, because I'm really well connected with a lot of the institutions around the state. So I'm able to tell them, if you're going here, you're going there, you can see these places. A lot of nonprofits that are not museums, that are places that artists could show at, venues that they could apply to have exhibitions. So all those things have helped me help the students. And then some of the artists that I've known have helped me bring those artists in, not because they were friends of mine. This is the one that sometimes is difficult, is that I don't have a problem showing artwork by friends of mine if their work is good.
Right.
If their work is not good, I don't show their
Have
work.
you been asked to show some work that you were less than enthusiastic about?
Well, as once people know you're a curator and you have a space, you're another different kind of a target. So I remember Janet and I went to an opening in Dallas, and in one gallery, I got hit up twice by two different artists for a show at our gallery. And that happens, and that's part of the terrain.
Right.
So I understand that.
It's like being a promoter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
have you been able to help students that students that you took particular interest in maybe get uh, get
I,
showings?
I try to help students where it helps, and sometimes they come back and ask me for help.
Mm-hmm.
I had one artist who's doing, a former student who's doing really well now. He called me up and said, "Oh, remember in your professional practices class, you were talking about public art. Can you refresh my memory? Because I'm dealing with this public art project, and my gallery wants, a certain percentage." And I said, "No, they don't get anything from a public art project. There's not money, not enough of a percentage that you're getting to split it with them."
Mm.
And so, and I said, "You were a fairly good student from what I remember. You don't remember that information?" And so it's like, I put it on them. But he's doing really well. I have other people that I try to help. And what was interesting is a year and 2 years ago, on spring break, my wife and I. No, it was last year. Last spring break we went to Kansas City and St. Louis to go to the museums. I showed at the Nelson Atkins Museum back in '93, and we got into the elevator, and there's two men in there, and one of them said, "Oh, are you all coming in from out of town visiting the museum?" I said, "Yeah, we're from Texas." And then he said, "You're from Texas, where?" He says, "Arlington." "I think I know you." I said, "What?" "I was in your professional practices class." And he was in the Bachelor of Fine Arts exhibit, and he graduated. And he said, "Remember I told you I was going to be the best artist in the world?" And I said, "I haven't gotten there yet." And then that happened at the Dallas Museum just a few weeks ago. We went in there, my wife and I went in there, and this guard came up to us. And I thought, we're not touching the painting. We're like,
Right.
I know the rules.
Yeah.
And so he said, "Hey, Benito." I said, "What? How do you know me?" He said, "I was in your class." Oh, no, he was not in my class. He was in a critique. I was a guest critiquer at the end of the semester for the advanced painting class. And he was in that class, and he was one of the students I critiqued. And so he wanted to talk, and he had looked up my website and liked what he saw because he didn't know much about me at that point. And so then he shared his website with me and all that. So
Do you find that rewarding when people come up to you and they know who you are, and especially former students, and they'll take the time to actually reach out to you?
I don't. I'm glad that they remember me.
Right.
Don't get me wrong, but it's like I feel like at a disadvantage because we have so many students.
Right. You can't
and
remember
it's
them
like
all.
I can't remember some. I remember
Yes.
because they made a presence in their work
Mm-hmm.
early on, and I see them in galleries and stuff. So there's
Sure.
more of an interaction. But I'm glad, in this case, he asked me if I would look at his website, and I did, and I said I'd follow up with some comments about the work, and so, I don't mind helping. I think that as an artist, in a sense, you're always you're a accidental educator, because the artwork is, as I told you, about ideas. So
Right.
I do artist talks, I do lectures, so I'm still educating people. I mean, that lecture last week it is a classroom, it's a university, but I've done lectures outside the university in museums and nonprofit spaces, and I enjoy that part of it.
So here in Arlington, how do you think the art scene has changed, and do you see fine arts at UTA as a discipline impacting the broader community?
No.
Talk about that.
I think that when I came to when I came to Arlington, not just UTA, but when I came to Arlington to live here, and part of the reason I came to Arlington as opposed to Dallas and Fort Worth is that I wanted to be close to the university. So because as a curator and as an artist, I do a lot of traveling, do studio visits to people out around the state. And then I have shows around the state and outside the state. So it was a lot of traveling. So I figure I do less traveling by being close. And so I felt like, well, this is where I'm putting roots down. And what I found was that shortly after I moved here was that Arlington and Grand Prairie decided not to have the DART system come through to connect Dallas and Fort Worth. And I thought that I began to realize that Arlington has a small town mindset that has having trouble growing into a city. Corpus Christi has less population than Arlington. Yet Corpus has a museum, has an art center, has a has a university, has a Del Mar College there. It's more of a city than Arlington is. The economics are here is that you have the university, you have the General Motors, and you have the malls, and you have the sports teams, and you have Six Flags, and
It's the entertainment
so
capital of
and
Texas.
it's entertainment, which means it's a service industry oriented place with no public transportation until via. So you need a lot of people who need to work at these places who are low wage job earners, and there's no public transportation, which is like, doesn't make sense. And then you have, and we're going to bigger issues now. These are the
Right.
things that I think about
Yes.
as being an artist as
Right,
well as
sure.
being a citizen. So, it's great that we have General Motors because they make good money, and they're probably around forever because they make the kind of cars people like. And I think the university, when I came here, was 19,000. Now it's over, 55,000
Right,
students.
yeah.
It's still growing. It's becoming really more of a college town now than a real college town. So, but how the arts have impacted, since I've been here, I've been trying to get a public art program within the university to start. And the UT, a lot of the other UT campuses have public art programs. So there's a certain percentage that goes to art from the construction budgets. So usually it's 1% to 2% for art. And UT Austin has a great public art program. It's called Landmark. And I've been trying to start it. I was trying to start it here, and it didn't go anywhere. It still hasn't gone anywhere. Yes, I did a public art piece. One of my former colleagues, Daryl Loster, has another one by the engineering building. And the rest are those horses. And it's like they're things that cities do for tourists, basically. And it's like, and they have like the branding on that new building that's right there across from Texas Hall, the new building there, and it has the Mustang or the Maverick horse, and it's like we're kind of one-dimensional that way. The Arlington Museum of Art just moved from downtown to the entertainment district. And they're now dedicated a space about 5,000 square feet out of their 20,000 square feet for the art department and the students and professors, I hope. And so, but they see it as an entertainment district. I wish that they stayed because there are now a lot of people living around this area now, and they could walk to that.
Right.
But I don't think that people come to the Arlington Museum of Art. We've actually, when I first got here, the Arlington Museum was downtown, right by City Hall, and I try to work with them. So when we have an opening, they kept their doors open, and when they had an opening, we kept our doors open. So when somebody from Dallas and Fort Worth came, they could see two shows instead of one in close proximity. So it was a way to help with that. And we haven't had that kind of collaboration in a long time. So I think there are people here who go to the museums and galleries, but there's not really a gallery, really good, commercial galleries, like important galleries here.
Do you think it's because Dallas and Fort Worth are so close that
No, it has to do with the money. The service industry. This is a service industry. There's not going to be money here. You could go to Plano. You could go to McKinney. There's money up there. Why is the high-tech industry is up there? There's people who spend money on art. There's not people who spend money here
I see.
on art. I buy art, but I can't afford, I can't even afford my big paintings.
you can't afford your own paintings?
Yeah, but I think it's a financial thing. But again, that was a path. I heard talk that at one point high tech was thinking of Arlington, and then but I think that the mayors said we want that. This is before high tech became high tech as far as money, and they said, well, we got the malls and the dealerships and all this. Like we don't need it.
How long altogether did you teach at UTA?
27 years. Was the director and curator of the gallery for 25. The first 25, I actually retired in 22 because I took on what they call phased retirement, and so I was on a contract basis, and then I was teaching 2 classes, no committee work, no faculty meetings, and half the pay and full benefits. So it was great. I know that a lot of professors wish that they had less committee work and less faculty meetings.
What do you think your biggest accomplishment was here at UTA?
Physically is the way the gallery looks right now. When we had the show at CAA, we got the administration to finish going up. The walls only went up to 10 feet. And so we went, and actually with one show, we had an artist who wanted to take the wall all the way up, and we got his gallery to give us money to take care of the sheetrocking plus the plywood behind the sheetrocking and take it up all the way so they could do a piece on the wall. So they finished up. All the walls were all set back, and then you saw the pillars and stuff, and so we couldn't hang anything above 10 feet for most of the gallery.
I see.
And then they came in, and for CAA, they went all the way up. They gave us that counter that you see there. We had a small, really small, almost kind of handmade counter there, and then they had fluorescent kind of stations all along the back of the counter, all along that ceiling. They took them all out and just let the track and put track lighting in there. So all of that was done, but as far as I think the legacy is the exhibitions. I mean, that to me,
right.
I think the work that Patricia and I did together in the gallery over 25 years, and she's still there, but I think we did some incredible shows. We had shows that some of the artists are now more famous than they were before, and some have gotten famous. And so I think it's been a good place. I think that one of the questions that I got asked a lot when I was here was, a lot of people thought we were just showing student work. And I said, no, we're showing artists who are making art out in the field, because I want to bring them in to show the students this is what you're going to be doing when you get out of here.
Right. So
they see a real artist, artwork that will be seen either in another commercial gallery or a nonprofit gallery or a museum. So we've had that kind of caliber of work in the gallery that they could learn from, and they could talk to these artists. At the beginning, we tried to, when the university was smaller, my wife was taking classes. Susan Harrington, who was teaching she was a professor at TCU, I had them do studio visits. You know, the artists sometimes would do studio visits.
Right.
She did a studio visit with Janet and got her into the graduate program. So those things happen as well.
Right.
So I was trying to get, work on that level as well. So
if you're now looking back over the years, what kind of advice do you have for young artists who are trying to establish themselves?
the first thing I would just say is that you have to believe in your work, and you have to believe in yourself, and you have to enjoy doing it all, because there's going to be, being an artist is not an easy,
Right.
it's not a career thing, it's a
Sure.
life choice thing. You're doing it because you love doing it, and you cannot not do it. So I happen to be fortunate in that I was able to have exhibitions, get my work out, being seen in commercial galleries, nonprofits, museum shows. I've sold many works, and I have pieces in museum collections. I'm very fortunate in that regard. Can I make a living off my work? No, I can't. That's why I got a job here.
Right.
I did not have insurance, health insurance, until I was here, and I was 45 years old.
Right.
I found out that I had a heart attack when 3 years before I came here
Oh,
in
my.
Houston,
Really?
because there was scar tissue from that heart attack.
And
And
you
they thought
didn't
I
know.
had heart attack. Well, I kind of thought I might have when I was in Houston because it felt like it, but I never experienced one before. So then I found out later, shortly after I got married, I said, I feel something strange in my heart. So my doctor said, you need to see a cardiologist. Cardiologist thought that I had a heart attack, but it was actually what they saw was scar tissue from the previous. And it might have been just a mild heart attack. It wasn't enough to kill me, I guess.
Right. Right.
But,
It's only a mild heart attack
Yeah,
if
it's only a mild
somebody
heart.
else's.
Yeah. I'm still alive. So, but no, I think that you have to, I think in any field, you should enjoy what you do.
Yes.
And if you don't do it, you're not in the right field. I mean, because there are going to be ups and downs in everything, and so you can weather those up and downs if it's something that you really love doing.
What do you think your legacy will be as an artist?
Well, I already know from my mom. I remember there was a friend of ours, a friend of mine that was an artist. He passed away a few years ago. And my mom said, your work is better than this other artist's work. I thought, well, that's a nice compliment. But your work is not as good as Mel Chin's work. And that's the truth. I mean, Mel, he got a MacArthur grant, which is referred to as the Genius Grant, because to me, he is a genius. But it's somebody that I know, and it's people like that kind of keep me on my toes. But I realize that I play a part. Going back to that show that I curated in 1985, that opened in 1986. It was in San Antonio, and Cesar Martinez was one of the artists in the show, and he helped me get a place to show the work there. And I told him, I said, what I'd like to do is make a mark in history of art. And he said, this is history. We are living history. And so, and now, just by the fact of doing everything that I've done, and being even here at running the gallery UTA and had the relationship with all these artists and all the things that I've done, is that there will be a place in the history. It may not be the name,
Right.
but it'll be there, and so it's already, there are books out there that have my name, and it's just like, well, I made a mark, but for me as an artist, that's not about what the work's about. It's about the work. It's about the ideas, and I'm still wanting to push those ideas.
Who is someone who collects your art that you are surprised collects your art?
The good surprise was, well, there's one that's not a surprise and one that is a surprise.
Okay.
One that was a surprise is that I was in an exhibition in Denver at one of the university galleries they had there, and I was actually asked to curate the show, and it was all Latino artists, and I was actually asked to curate, and I said I'd rather be in it.
Right.
So they got somebody who put me in the show, and there was a large piece, 7 feet by 11 feet, black velvet, um, a LED panel on the right, and it was called Exile off Main Street, and it's based on Picasso's Demoiselles d'Avignon on the left, and I could go on about the painting, but what happened was they had a speaker at the opening, and I had seen him earlier at another talk at the proper campus. Their university gallery was in downtown area, and so he was doing a talk, and it turned out it was Cheech Marin, and there was a brochure of the show, and people were getting him to sign the brochure, even though he had nothing to do with the show. He just was there because he was doing a talk about Chicano art, because he was collecting Chicano art. And so a friend of mine who was in the show, who I'd known for a while, she was in front of me, and she was the last one to get his autograph. They cut me off.
Oh.
And they said, well, no more after her. And so I said, okay. So the assistant director came up to me and said, somebody wants to meet you. I said, oh, it's like being called by the dean, assistant dean again. So you go to their office and walk in the office, and it's Cheech Marin sitting there and wants to talk to me. And so we ended up talking, and I said, in 1972, I saw you. I said, when I was booking concerts, it was not my concert. It was downtown, and it was at the music hall. And back then, promoters would give tickets to each other. They asked, you give them tickets. You ask, they give you tickets.
Right.
So I called the concert promoter. I said, I want to see Cheech and Chong. And he said, well, we sold out. But I'm going to put your name on the backstage list. So just come through the backstage door. Your name will be on the list. So we saw him from the side of the stage. So I said, I saw your act from the side, and so I helped bring him with Carlos Don Juan, one of my former colleagues here too, helped bring Cheech Marin for the CIMAs. And I was introduced by Christian Zolinsky, who was the director of CIMAs at the time. And then I introduced Cheech, and I said, I told him the story, and I said, it's the same angle as I'm seeing him right now on stage. Except it was on the other side.
Did you quote movie lines back to him or anything like that?
No, I didn't. So Carlos and I would interview him then. But that was, and then about a year after the Denver, I had a one-person show at the museum in Corpus, and Art Museum of South Texas, the Philip Johnson building. Architecture, beautiful architecture. And there was somebody who was on the board wanted to buy that painting that was in that Denver show, the Black Velvet. And so we worked out a deal, and a month after I sold it, the show was still up. Cheech calls. It's like, how did he get my number? So he calls and he says, oh, I really want to buy that painting that you showed in Denver. And I said, well, I just sold it. Damn. So I said, well, but I have a watercolor that's in the show too, but it's a watercolor of the same image, but it's a watercolor and graphite, and it's a 40 by 60. And he said, how much is that? And I told him, and he said, a week later he calls back, so I'll buy it. And then he wants me to come down in price, and I said, I'll come down a little bit, but the frame cost itself was like $1,500. So he still buys it, and so, but he had bought 2 years earlier a painting at a commercial gallery, because the show that he did, Chicano Visions, was opening at the San Antonio Museum. And I was in a show that friend of mine that was in that show that I was in Denver that got this autograph. I did get his autograph later.
Yeah, I hope so.
So she organized a show in which I was in San Antonio, and he came and saw my painting and bought it.
Wow.
So he already had that painting, but he saw the velvet painting, and he really wanted that one.
Yes.
And those two were related, though. The other painting was related to that. So that was a surprise.
Yes.
And then I went up to the Cheech Marin Center in Riverside and been there a couple times. And I'm now on the advisory board there.
Oh, really?
So yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I was there last May because I was in a show there that was going to come down. They still had my other painting, the Black Velvet painting in lead piece, up, and he said, we're not going to move your painting for a while because it's a heavy painting.
Right.
So it's a nice idea to remember to do heavy pieces so they won't move.
So they can't move them.
Then the other one was somebody that I met who bought in the late 80s, a lot of artists, Houston artists, were asked to do these ceramic plates. They gave you the plate greenware, and you could do whatever you want with them, and then they would have a Christmas show of these plates. And this person who I didn't know bought them and wanted to meet me, and the gallery person said, this person really wants to meet you. Can they come see you work? I said, yeah, I'm happy. Some artists don't want to deal with that. And I don't have a problem because as a curator, I meet all kinds of people.
Right.
So he came over, we met and became friends, and I started going around. He was talking that he liked a certain artist, Peter Saul, who taught at UT Austin for a while, famous artist. And but I said he couldn't afford it. I said, have you saw John Hernandez? He was in that show in 1986. So we went to Moody Gallery, saw the piece, bought it. And then he bought, the plate was one of the second pieces he's ever bought, or first one. He bought some more ceramic pieces. And then now he has 4 large paintings, 2 of them really large paintings. And then work on paper. And then he's got a huge collection. So his collection has been shown at the museum in Corpus, at Art Pace, and other places. So,
Well, I think we're about to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Do you
probably-
have anything? Yeah,
it's probably,
maybe about time, you think?
yeah.
Do you have anything that you'd like to add to this conversation that we haven't discussed?
No, but I would say, because it's here at UTA, that I really enjoyed being here at UTA. I mean, because I got to meet a lot of people within this area. Some artists in the area were shocked that I moved from Houston to
Right.
Arlington. Not that I was not part of the Metroplexes, is that Houston has a really vital art scene, and I think the Dallas-Fort Worth art scene has grown immensely since I've been here. Some major museums here, so I think that it's really grown a lot. And I've been fortunate enough to meet and work with some really great people in the art department, and work with Patricia, who I think she's wonderful and has been, I don't know that I could have done the job without her. She's been great help. So it was a good experience. The experience hasn't stopped. That chapter is closed, and
Right.
and I'm going back to what I was doing before I came up here, which is going back to being an artist and possibly freelance curating, and probably some more writing, because the other thing about being a curator, you have to write.
Oh.
So curatorial statements,
Mm-hmm.
and then I've been asked to write. I've been for Mel's show back in the mid '90s, and Luis's catalog. I had to write essays for them,
Mm-hmm.
and then wrote a kind of a chapter for another artist who I've shown in El Paso. He was having a retrospective at the El Paso Museum, and Enrique. I'm blanking on his name, but he's having a one-person show, and then Lucy Lepard, who's a professional art critic,
Mm.
was doing the other, and they were supposed to send autographed copies of Gaspar Enriquez catalog, um, and I said to Gaspar, "Would you sign it? Sign it off to me and your autograph?" And he said, so they sent my book to her and her book to me. And
Nice.
then
Yeah.
we had a little correspondence. Said your essay was really good, and she's a professional writer. And I was just like,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I was happy.
Maybe a new career beyond just art and being a curator, right?
Yeah, it could
Right.
be another career. So it's a lot of possibilities. It's always good to have possibilities and potentials
Right.
and none.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and thank
Sure.
you for agreeing to be interviewed. It's
Yeah,
been
thanks.
very
Thanks
interesting.
for having me.
Thank you so much.
Yes, I'd like to make a couple of clarifications. One of them was I might have mentioned in the interview just a few minutes ago that when I curated the last two shows that I did for the gallery, the one that was done in 2022 of Mel Chin, I curated that, and I was still the director and curator of the gallery at GTA. The following year, I was organizing Luis Jimenez exhibition, but I felt like I needed some assistance with that show because I had actually 3 shows coming up myself, and so I needed to be able to have somebody help me put this together. And we weren't doing the whole gallery like we did with Mel's show, so I asked Christina Reese if she could help me co-curate the show. And I had seen, she used to be the editor for Glass Tire magazine, an online arts magazine. And at one time she was, they were talking about, they have what they call a top 5 every week exhibits in the state. And so what ended up happening is that they usually are at a different location. And at the location they were at that point was there was a small Luis Jimenez exhibit at Moody Gallery in Houston. And I learned that she really loved Luis's work. So I thought she might be a really good person to work with concerning the exhibition. So she was a big help, and she wrote the essay for the brochure, which was a great essay, pretty direct and real strong proponent of Luis being like one of the greatest artists in the United States. Which I don't disagree with at all because I love his work. So I just wanted to give credit where credit is due because I think it's important for that. The other one is that I realized that there was a 2-pronged question that you had asked me about the impact of the Arlington's art community and particularly the impact of the fine arts department on the art scene on a broader level. And I kind of talked about, I think that, first of all, real quickly, the Arlington art scene really hasn't changed that much. I think the Arlington Museum of Art and the Gallery GTA are still the more vital arts organizations in town, which is great, but I also think it's not enough. I mean, there are a few commercial galleries, but I don't think it's one where it really attracts a lot of interest from outside the area. I think the Arlington Museum of Art and the Gallery GTA tried to do their best to bring people to Arlington to see what's going on. And I feel like we really did that successfully at the Gallery GTA under my tenure. I can't tell you how that is going because I'm no longer the director there. So, but the other one that I do want to say is that at the beginning when I got here in 1997, as I mentioned already, that the art department was really small, and the gallery had suffered kind of a financial setback. So they didn't have the money to do the kind of shows they were doing before, which gained them national reputation. I mean, I knew the gallery ever since it started. There's a friend of mine, I think I might have mentioned it before, Soya Munoz, who had, trotted me over here to the university to see the gallery as it started, and then over the years saw it develop. But it had some incredible shows and some incredible artists, nationally known artists, coming into Arlington, of all places. The name of the gallery before it was the Gallery GTA was actually called the Center for Research in Contemporary Art, which is kind of a funny name because I don't think that anybody thought of Arlington as being the Center for Research in Contemporary Art. So I found it humorous. At the same time, I thought it was a way to, in a sense, give purpose to the gallery. But I think that since the department and the university has grown, and we started an MFA program, we have attracted a lot of students from outside the area and even outside the country, especially for our MFA program. I think that as a result of that, we've had I think to me, a really strong influence not influence, but I would say an outreach from our students, or then now alumni, who've gone out into the art world in various capacities. And some of those could be not only as artists, but they could be preparators of museums. They could be working at galleries, working for the gallerists themselves. I know that one of our former students now runs a gallery in Fort Worth. They do public art projects around the state. They help with the museums and educational departments, doing workshops on making drawings, say, from the collection, or making artwork in their kind of their own classrooms. And then they also arts writers. Some of this artists that you never think of artists being arts writers, but some of them become art writers or critics, and which I've done as well, which I never thought I'd do, but I was really glad that, as I mentioned, I took short story writing in undergraduate school, and I'm kind of glad I did, because besides writing curatorial statements, I've also written reviews and essays for exhibition catalogs. So it's really kind of in handy. But what I'm saying is that the department's alumni has really gone out and become part of the art world's ecosystem on a regional and national level. So I think that we've had a really strong output of what our students have been able to contribute to the art world in general. So I think that's one of the things I wish I had said when you asked me that question, but I got kind of fixated with Arlington instead of talked about that first part of the question, but that part of the question was something that I didn't really address, and I wanted to do that because I think it's important to say that the department has really grown, and its influence has grown, and it's helped a lot of the art institutions and the artists in our communities. I think that as a result, I wish that the department that continued growth, and I also hope that the Gallery GTA and the Arlington Museum of Art are still growing and still trying to do vital exhibitions, because we need it, especially during these times. That I think the art world needs other voices, and I think those are places that are platforms for all kinds of voices to be expressing their ideas, their emotions, everything that's going on what goes on in people's lives. I think that's an important aspect of what art can do. And in a sense, because art is about those kinds of things, it kind of ties us to each other, because we all share our humanity with each other. So by sharing your stories, you're making connections with other people who would like to be able to tell their stories but don't have an outlet. And so this is a way for them to make a connection and hopefully grow a society that becomes much more connected and work and realize that we're all in this together, and to work together for the cause of us, all of us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your continuing this.
Sure. Thank you.